2,300 tons. That is what was sitting in the hold of a French cargo ship docked at the port of Texas City on the morning of April the 16th, 1947. 2,300 tons of a compound that everyone in that port handled every working day. That had been arriving by rail from Nebraska and Iowa for 2 years. That nobody required a hazard label on because it was classified not as an explosive, but as fertilizer. It was going to feed European farms recovering from the Second World War. It was going to detonate at 9:12 a.m. and produce one of the largest non-nuclear explosions in recorded history. 581 people would die. The entire volunteer fire department of Texas City would be killed almost to the last man. And when the families of the dead tried to hold someone accountable, the Supreme Court told them this had been an act of government discretion. This is what that morning looked like from the beginning. Texas City was not a large city. In 1947, roughly 16,000 people lived there, most of them within a mile of the water. What made it significant was not its size, but its position. A protected harbor on Galveston Bay with a straight channel to the Gulf of Mexico and a rail line running directly to the dock. By the end of the war, the port was handling oil, synthetic rubber, grain, and chemicals. Refineries and chemical plants had been built along the waterfront during the 1930s and 40s. Warehouses sat at the edge of the docks. The terminal railway ran freight cars to the pier's edge. Residential streets began a few hundred yards behind the industrial line. Everything was close. That was the design. The efficiency of the port depended on proximity. Cargo moving from rail to dock to ship without distance to slow it down. In 1945, the port added a new export: ammonium nitrate fertilizer, manufactured in Nebraska and Iowa and shipped south by rail. The Port of Houston had declined to handle it. Texas City accepted the contract. By 1947, shipments were routine. Longshoremen loaded it the same way they loaded grain. Ammonium nitrate looks like coarse white salt. Under ordinary conditions, stored cool and dry, it is stable. You can move it, stack it, ship it across an ocean, and nothing happens. Farmers across Europe were waiting for it. It was going to rebuild fields that the war had destroyed. But heat changes it. Apply sustained heat inside a sealed space, and ammonium nitrate begins to break down. As it breaks down, it releases oxygen, not from the air around it, but from within the compound itself. That released oxygen feeds the surrounding fire. A hotter fire accelerates the breakdown. More breakdown means more oxygen. More oxygen means more heat. The process feeds itself from the inside, independent of whatever air supply exists around it. This is what makes it different from most cargo. A fire needs 3 things to burn: fuel, heat, and air. Remove the air and most fires die. Ammonium nitrate carries its own air supply inside its chemical structure. Sealing the space around it does not starve the fire. It concentrates the heat. The SS Grandcamp was a 437-foot Liberty ship, originally built for the United States Navy in 1942. After the war, it was transferred to France as part of the post-war Reconstruction program and renamed. By April 1947, it was docked at Texas City, engine under repair, unable to move under its own power. The ship had 5 cargo holds. Hold 4 contained most of the ammonium nitrate, 2,300 tons of it, packed in paper bags coated with petroleum jelly, rosin, and paraffin wax to keep moisture out. On deck and in adjacent holds, bales of sisal twine, small arms ammunition, peanuts, tobacco, and cotton. It looked like an ordinary mixed cargo. Just before 8 a.m., longshoremen removed the hatch covers from Hold 4 to begin loading the final 600 tons of ammonium nitrate. Smoke was rising from the cargo already inside. They reached for what was available: a gallon jug of water, 2 fire extinguishers. Neither made a difference. The smoke continued. The longshoremen were ordered off the ship. Captain Charles de Guillabon made a decision. No water. Water poured into the hold would saturate the cargo and ruin it. Instead, he ordered the hatches sealed and steam pumped into the hold. This was standard shipboard fire procedure. Steam displaces oxygen. Without oxygen, a fire cannot sustain itself. On any other cargo, in any other hold, the logic was sound. Ammonium nitrate does not follow that logic. As the compound heats and begins to break down, it produces its own oxygen from within its chemical structure. Steam can displace every molecule of outside air in that hold, and the breakdown continues regardless. There is no outside air supply to cut off. The fire is generating its own. The steam also added heat directly to a hold that was already warming. More heat meant faster breakdown. Faster breakdown meant more internal oxygen. The sealed hold was now a closed system accelerating toward its own conclusion. At 8:30 a.m., the pressure building inside blew the hatch covers off the deck. A column of smoke erupted. Orange, black, dense. One witness standing on the dock described it as the most beautiful smoke he had ever seen. Orange in the morning light. At 8:37 a.m., a call went out for outside help. The Texas City Volunteer Fire Department responded. 27 of its 28 members. 4 trucks. The Republic Oil Refining Company fire team arrived shortly after. The smoke was visible from across the city. A column of orange and black rising from the waterfront on a clear April morning. Dock fires were not unusual in Texas City. They happened. Firefighters dealt with them. Residents had learned to walk down and watch. Approximately 500 people gathered at the head of the slip, a few hundred feet from the Grandcamp. Workers on their way to shifts, families out early, children. They stood at what seemed like a reasonable distance from an ordinary fire on a ship. From where they stood, it looked manageable. Firefighters were on the dock, hoses connected, water playing across the deck. Where the water hit the hull, it turned immediately to steam. To the crowd that just looked like the hoses were working. Nobody in that crowd knew what was in Hold 4. Almost nobody on the dock knew either. What they saw was professionals doing their job on a burning ship. At 9 a.m., the flames abated slightly. People relaxed. The fire seemed to be dying down. 8:30 a.m. The hatch covers are gone, blown off by internal pressure. The smoke column rising from Hold 4 has turned orange-yellow. That color is not incidental. It is nitrogen dioxide, the gas produced when ammonium nitrate breaks down under heat. The color itself is evidence. Decomposition is already underway inside the hold. 8:45 a.m. A photograph taken from the dock at this moment shows water streams from the fire hoses playing across the Grandcamp's deck. Where the water lands, it vaporizes on contact. The hull temperature is that high. The firefighters keep the hoses running. 9 a.m. Flames erupt from the open hatch. The smoke thickens. Witnesses on the dock describe it in their own words: a pretty gold, yellow color. Orange smoke in the morning sunlight, beautiful to see. And then, minutes later, the flames appear to lessen. The visible fire at the hatch seems to pull back. Captain Guillabon is on the pier, away from the ship, taking a head count of his crew. The crowd at the head of the slip watches the smoke and waits. What is visible at the hatch is not the problem. What is happening inside the sealed lower sections of Hold 4 is. The steam system is still running. Heat is still accumulating in the cargo that was never reached by water or extinguisher. The decomposition chain is advancing through the mass of ammonium nitrate in the lower hold, generating heat, releasing oxygen, generating more heat. The process does not need air from outside. It does not need flames at the hatch. It only needs time. 9 a.m. to 9:12 a.m. 12 minutes. The crew on deck cannot see it. The firefighters on the dock cannot measure it. The 500 people watching from the slip cannot know it. At 9:12 a.m., the ammonium nitrate in hold 4 reached its threshold. The Grandcamp detonated. The ship did not catch fire more severely. It did not break apart slowly. The entire structure disintegrated in a single instant. A mushroom cloud climbed over 2,000 feet into the morning sky. The shock wave moved outward at the speed of sound, knocking 2 light aircraft flying overhead out of the sky. A 15-foot wall of harbor water surged across the docks and swept back out, carrying with it everything that had been standing at the slip's edge. The Grandcamp's 2-ton anchor was thrown 1.6 miles. Steel fragments from the hull traveled across the port for several minutes, puncturing oil storage tanks at nearby refineries, shredding warehouse walls, tearing through the Monsanto chemical plant directly across the slip. Of the 450 Monsanto employees at work that morning, 143 were killed in the first minutes. Bales of burning sisal from the ship's deck cargo fell across a wide radius, landing on rooftops, rail yards, and open ground, starting fires in dozens of locations simultaneously. Approximately 600 feet away, the SS High Flyer, carrying approximately 1,000 tons of ammonium nitrate and 2,000 tons of sulfur, was torn from its moorings by the blast and drifted across the harbor, coming to rest against another vessel. Her crew stayed aboard for an hour before smoke and fumes forced them off. Fires were later spotted in her holds. Tugs manned by volunteers arrived from Galveston at 11 p.m. and attempted to pull her clear. They did not succeed in time. At 1:10 a.m. on April the 17th, the High Flyer detonated. Witnesses described the second blast as even more violent than the first. Crude oil storage tanks ignited in a chain reaction that burned for days. 27 of the 28 members of the Texas City Volunteer Fire Department were killed. They had been on the dock, hoses running, working the fire on a ship they had no reason to treat as anything other than a ship fire. The one survivor was not on the docks when the Grandcamp detonated. Until the attacks of September the 11th, 2001, this was the largest single loss of life suffered by any fire department in United States history. Among those killed, 19 fire department members left no recoverable remains. 31 crew members of the Grandcamp died with them. Longshoremen, terminal railway workers, Monsanto employees, Republic Oil personnel, and the 500 people who had gathered to watch from what seemed like a safe distance. All of them were inside the blast radius when the hold gave way. Children had been on the pier. The confirmed death toll reached at least 581. The true number is not known. Transient workers, visiting sailors, and others with no fixed record in the city were never accounted for. Some simply vanished from the rolls without a body or a report. 63 victims were buried in a memorial cemetery without identification. The blast pressure and heat at the center of the dock was sufficient not merely to kill, but to leave nothing behind. For 63 people, there was no remains to name. In February 1948, the United States Bureau of Mines published its findings. The conclusion was precise. The explosion was caused by heat-induced breakdown of ammonium nitrate inside a sealed, steam-heated hold. The fire had crossed a point from which the chemical reaction could not be stopped. What followed was not a fire that became an explosion. It was a fire that was handled in a way that made an explosion inevitable. The investigation identified 3 systemic failures. The first, the cargo was classified as fertilizer, not as a hazardous material. No special handling protocols applied to it at any stage. Not in manufacture, not in packaging, not in loading, not in storage aboard the ship. The people responsible for it at every point in that chain were operating under the assumption that it was an agricultural product. The second, steam suppression was the accepted method for fighting fires in ship holds. It was the correct response for almost any other cargo. Nobody in the response chain on the morning of April the 16th knew that it was the wrong response for this one. The training did not cover it. The classification system had never required it to. The third, the port placed a reactive cargo, active machinery, fuel storage, a major chemical plant, and a residential population within a few hundred yards of each other. When the first failure became an explosion, the layout guaranteed the cascade. 8,485 plaintiffs filed suit against the federal government under the Federal Tort Claims Act of 1946. In 1950, a district court found the government negligent across 168 separate failures. In 1953, the Supreme Court overturned that ruling 4-3, finding the government's decisions were a discretionary function and therefore not actionable. Justice Robert Jackson dissented. He wrote, "This was a man-made disaster. It was in no sense an act of God." The reforms came. New labeling requirements for ammonium nitrate, temperature restrictions on shipping, prohibitions on storing it near fuel oil or sulfur. Texas City refineries formed the Industrial Mutual Aid System, a coordinated emergency response model later adopted across the country. The port itself never resumed bulk cargo handling. It shifted to petroleum and stayed there. The lesson did not fully hold. In 2013, a fertilizer facility in West Texas caught fire and detonated, killing 15 first responders, destroying 150 buildings. It had not been inspected in nearly 30 years. The root cause was identical to 1947. In 2020, 2,750 tons of improperly stored ammonium nitrate destroyed the port of Beirut and killed over 200 people. Remember Texas City. Not because it was singular, because it was a pattern. The same cargo, the same assumptions, the same gap between what the system knew and what it acted on. The question Texas City leaves behind is not why it happened in 1947. The question is why it keeps happening.